Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you how to use sessions in Flask through a very simple example of using a login form. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to build this simple login form where you can put in a username and a password, and if you can log in properly then you will see your username, whatever that is, in my case Anthony, and then the user ID number 1. So we won't be using a database for this, but we'll be using an in-memory data store, so we keep everything simple in this tutorial, kind of short. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that I have courses on my site available. You can go to prettyprinted.com or the link in the description below and you can check out the courses that I have. The best course for anyone watching this video would probably be Flask SQL Alchemy Basics, which is a free course that covers various things that you can do in Flask SQL Alchemy, creating different things, inserting data, along with the different type of statements that you can have in your queries. So null and not null, order by, not equals and like, and so on. So if you want to check out this, it's completely free. Just go to the link in the description below or prettyprinted.com. Both work. So to start, I already have a few things. I have an environment set up and it's active, and I have 2 templates. So to start with this environment, I'll install Flask. And while that installs, what I'll do is I'll show you the templates that I have. So I have a login page and I have a profile page, and this is still Hello Boma. So let me change this to like login, and then that should look a little bit better. Yeah, so we have a login page. So basically the user will fill out their username and the password, hit login, and then if it's successful, it will take them to this login page where it's going to show their username eventually and their number as you've seen before. So I'll just close these because we'll be seeing them inside the app from now on. And what I will start with is by creating an app.py file. And in here, I can start the import. So I already know I'm going to import a few things. So let's say from Flask, import, and I know I'll need the Flask class. And in addition to that, I'll need like a render template, and that should be enough to start with. So I'll instantiate the Flask object using dunder name, and then I'll create 2 routes. So the first route is going to be a login route, and as you can probably guess, I'm going to return the template for login. So return login.html, and then I'll do something similar for the profile. So I will return the profile. So return and then render template, and I'll return profile.html. And now if I run this app, and let me put it in development mode. So I'll change the Flask environment to development. So it will be in debug mode, and it will restart automatically whenever I make a change. And I'll do Flask run. So let's take a look. So if I go to the index, nothing's there because I don't have anything on the index. But if I go to the login page, I see the login page. And if I go to profile, I see the profile page. So of course nothing gets filled in yet because I don't have any kind of user, but that's what we're going to build. So what I want to do next is I want to build like a concept of a user, and I'm going to do this pretty simply. I'm going to create a user class, and I'm just going to append these user objects that I create from this class to a list that's going to be a global variable. So instead of having a database, we're just going to have a global variable inside of our app. So to do this, I'll do it up here actually. I'll create the user class, and this is going to be really, really simple. So it's going to have a dunder init, and it's going to take in a couple of things for the user, actually 3 things. So we want an ID, we want a username, and we want a password. And then I'm going to just set these to the values that are passed in. So self ID equals ID, and then the same for username and password. So username is username, and then the password is going to be password. And then I can return like a representation of this so we can see it working on the command line just to make sure it works. So what I can do is I can return, let's say, an F string that just says user, and then we'll pass in the name of the user. So self.username, and then that way we can see all the users that exist. And then, like I said, I'll have a global variable that represents all the users. So we'll just call this users. It's going to be a list. And then I can append some users to this list. So users.append, and then I will create users. So ID is going to be 1 for this user. Username is going to be equal to, let's say Anthony. And then the password is going to be equal to, let's just say password. So obviously not a good password, and it's in plain text, but this is an example. So I'll just type in password. And then what I want to do is I want to print all the users that I have. Okay. So let me stop the server really quick, and let me just comment out all the Flask code just so we can see those users working. So actually I don't want Flask run, but we see it here. So what I meant to do was Python and then the name of the file, which is app. So we see user Anthony, and of course I can add in more users if I want. So append user, and we'll just add another one. So 2 will be enough. And I don't need to reference the names here by name, the parameter names by name, but just to make it a little more clear what I'm doing. So the second user will be, let's say Becca, and her password will be secret. And if I run Python app again, we see user Anthony and user Becca. And if I do something like this, so give me the user at the first index and then give me their password, then we'll see secret here, just like that. And of course I can change it to anything else. So like username, instead of the password, I see Becca, and the ID is going to be exactly the same. I should see 2. Okay, so we know that our list of users is working correctly. So that's really all we need to do. So let me remove the print statement, and let me bring back the Flask stuff. And basically the approach that I want to take is when the user fills out the login form. So I need to start the server so we can see it again. But when the user fills out the login form, my app is going to check if the username and password are correct. If they are, it's going to use the session to basically log that user in, and it's going to redirect them to the profile. So let's handle that inside of the login. So for this, it's going to have 2 cases for get and post. So we have to set methods equal to both get and post. By default, it's just get and post. And then what I want to do is I need to import request, so I can check if it's either get or post. So if request.method is post, I want to do one thing, and then if it's get, then I'll just let it fall through to render template, because I'll have a return statement in post if everything works correctly. So what I want to do now is I want to gather the information for the username and the password. So I can do this simply. I can create a variable called username, and in my login.html for the form, so this is a form, we see method posts, and the username has a name of username and the password has a name of password. So pretty straightforward. So I can get those by using a request.form and then username, and then I can do the same thing for password. And then once I have those 2, that's where I can do the check to see if the user is in fact a valid user and if they have the correct password. So what I want to do is I want to basically search the list that I have here for the username first. So I can say something like this: user equals, and then it's going to be a list comprehension to keep this simple. So I'm going to loop over this list users, and then I'm going to pull out anything that matches the username. So what I mean by that is I can say x for x in users, and then I can say if x dot username equals the username, right? So what this will do is it will check to see if the username that the user passed in is equal to any of the usernames in the list. And we're going to assume that they're all going to be unique. If they weren't unique, then this wouldn't work very well. But of course, in any real user system, all the usernames will be unique, along with the passwords being unique as well. So it's going to check if the username that is passed in matches any of the usernames in the list of users. And if it does, then it's going to return a new list with all those users. And because it's unique, it should only have one element, so I can just select that element directly. So this will actually fail if I try to pass in a username that doesn't exist at all, but I'm going to ignore that case to keep it simple. And instead, I'm just going to focus on the case where the password is invalid. So here, this user will be the user will have a value if we find anything. And then I can say if user and if user.password is equal to the password that they passed in, right? So here's the password that they passed in. And then this is the password that's in our data store, which is the global list of users. So if those two things are true, then what I can do is here I can set the session to have the user, basically logging in the user. So I need to bring in session. So I'll go back to imports, session. And then what I want to do is I want to say session, and then I'll create a key and I'll call this user ID is going to be equal to user.id. And what I also want to do is anytime a user attempts to log in, I'm going to pop out the user ID in the session to kind of start over. So this is what other sites actually do. So if you attempt to log in when you're already logged in, it's going to remove your session and then try to create a new session. So if you happen to enter the wrong password when you try to log in again, then you're going to be logged out until you can enter the correct password, even though you were logged in before. So session pop, what I want to do is I want to pop the username, or not the username, but the user ID. And we don't need to worry about returning anything, so we'll put none. So session pop user ID. So this is going to remove the user ID if there is one already inside the session. So we're just going to set the user ID inside the session to user.id. So an important thing to note here is that the session here is something that gets translated into a cookie. So we can only pass in simple data types to it. We can't pass in Python objects to a cookie. That doesn't make any sense. So this may be able to take like, a user object and convert it to something that makes sense inside of a cookie. But to avoid doing that in the first place, we're just going to pass very simple data to the session, which is just an ID, which is just an integer, because we can't pass in a complete user object, because that only exists inside of our app here, and it doesn't really make sense in the context of a cookie that's going to live on the user's browser. So we're just going to pass in a number to the session, and then later we're going to take out that number and then get the user object itself. So we have the session user ID, and then once this happens, we can say return. We're going to redirect, and then URL4. So I need to import those as well. So we'll add redirect up here, and then URL4. And we're going to redirect them to the profile, because after they log in, they should be able to go to the profile page. So profile, just like that. So now we need to think of the other cases. So in the case where the user doesn't exist, which it should, or the password is incorrect, we just want to redirect them back to the login screen so they can try again. So normally you would have some kind of message here, but that would make the code a little more complicated, and I want to keep this video focused on the session part. But just look into message flashing if you're interested in that. But in our case, we're just going to redirect right back to the login screen if the user fails to provide the correct password for the username that they selected. So now let's just make sure that all the cases have return statements. So in the case that it's not a post, it's going to return the template, which is what we want. And then inside the post, we can look here and we can check this if statement. So basically, if they log in correctly, it redirects them to profile. And if anything goes wrong with the login, then they just get redirected back to the login. So let's make sure that our form works, and we'll get redirected to profile in the case that we can select the correct password and username combination. So let's go here. I'll just refresh, and we have an indentation error on line 34. And I don't see where that would be. So let me just delete everything and try again. And I'll restart the server as well just to make sure. And let's see. Okay, so it's working again. It's just one of those things that happens with Python and text editors. So I'm going to try Anthony, and I'm going to start with a password that doesn't actually exist. So I'll hit login, and we see the session is unavailable because no secret key was set. So in the last video, I talked about how secret keys are necessary to work with sessions, and I haven't set one here. So what I'll do is app.secret_key is going to be some secret key that only I should know. So I'll say some secret key that only I should know. That's pretty secret, right? So now if I refresh, let's try this again. So I'll try Anthony, and then I'll try a password that doesn't exist. I'll hit login and it redirects me to the login screen because the password isn't right. So when I put in the correct password, which I forgot already, it's just password actually. So password, it redirects me to the profile page. So this is how I know that I was logged in successfully. So now let me add in the information to this profile so I can see it. So to use that, I'm going to use the G object. So the G object is somewhat similar to a global variable. So it's something you import from Flask. So from Flask, import G. And the way this works is basically G is going to be available across the request context. So a request is just when a user, requests something from the server. So like they go to one particular route. From the beginning to the end of that process, you have like a session, or not a session context, but a request context. And G makes it easy to store data between different functions without having to pass things around directly. So it's kind of global to the request, whereas this users is global to the app itself. So this is something that all users have access to regardless of where they're coming from, whereas G is specific to one individual request. So it's always going to be one user. So with that, what I want to do is I want to always check the session at the beginning of the request. And if the session exists, I want to put the user information inside of that G object, so it's going to be available inside of other things that I may use inside of the request context. So to do that, it's actually going to be app and then before requests. So as you can imagine, this will happen before anything else happens. And I'll call this before requests as well. And what I want to do is I want to check to see if the user ID exists in the session. So I can say if user ID in session. What I want to do is I want to first find that user, because remember, I just have the user ID, whereas I have a list of users here. So I want to find the user. So user is going to be, and this is the list comprehension again. So I'll just take this one because it's pretty much the same. And this could be a function to get a user, but just to keep it simple, I'll just copy the list comprehension. So here, instead of username, I need the ID. So I have ID here, and this is going to be session username. And once again, we expect only one match. So if this actually happens, we want to put the user on the global object. So we can say g.user is going to be equal to user. So now anywhere that we can use G, which is pretty much anywhere, we'll have access to the user if they're logged in already. So the way this works is if we go to the profile, inside of the templates is where you can use G. So what I can do is I can say g.user.name will give me the name of whoever is logged in, and then I can also get their number. So g.user.id, because we put that user object here on g.user. So that's why we can do that. So if we take a look now and refresh the profile, we see user number 1 has appeared, but we don't see anything for the name. So if we go back, this should be username, not just name. So now after changing that, if I refresh, we see Anthony's profile. So now if I go back to login and I try with the other user, Becca, and her password was secret, and I log in, we see Becca's profile, and then we see number 2 for that user. And of course, if we add in another user to the list, so let's say users, append user ID, and then username is going to be Carlos, and his password will be something simple. Okay. So now if I go back and I log in with Carlos, and then something simple, then we see Carlos's profile and then number 3 because that is his user ID. So we're almost done. What I want to do is I want to make sure that the user is actually logged in here for profile, because if I log out, so I'll try logging in with a user and then I'll make sure that fails. And then I'll go back to profile. So remember that I popped the session out when when I attempt to log in. So if I fail to log in, then I won't have a session anymore. So that's why we get this error, because this has no user here. And one way I can handle this is I can say something like this. So else g user equals none, or to actually make this even shorter, I can start it off as being none, and then I can check inside the session. So now when I do this, it should work, but we should see that there's nothing here. So what I want to do is I want to check inside of profile to make sure that they're logged in. So I can say something like if not g.user. So if g.user is none, what I want to do is I want to abort 403, which is forbidden. So abort 403. We won't have any special screen. Or you know what, to make this even better, I'll just redirect them to the login page because it kind of fits with everything else. So I'll just take this and I'll copy here. So if they're not logged in already, I'll redirect them to the login screen. If they are logged in, meaning g.user has something in it, it just returns the profile. So now if I refresh this, we get another indentation error because I just copy and paste it. So let's try this and restart the server. Okay, so it redirects me to the login page. So I'm typing in /profile and it sends me back to the login page. So that should be it. So something simple. And I didn't type it in correctly. Let's just go back to Anthony. Password, and it redirects me to Anthony's profile. You are user ID number 1. So I know the actual session part of this tutorial is pretty simple, but that's because sessions in Flask are simple. But really, for sessions to have meaning, there has to be like some bigger context. So like in the last video, I talked about how to create like dark mode with sessions. And in this video, I have like a little login system built around the session. So with these two videos, I think you'll have a better idea of how sessions can be used within your Flask app if you have anything that you want to persist across basically visits to your app by the user. So that's it for this video. As a reminder, you can check out the courses that I have on my site. I have one for Flask SQL Alchemy Basics, where you can learn about all the different things that you could do in Flask SQL Alchemy that would be useful. If you want a really simple tutorial, Intro to Flask is similar to this in the sense that you build a really simple app and you learn all the fundamentals of Flask through building that simple app. And then I have more complicated courses that are available that are more fully featured that you can check out, like the Flask Extensions course, which is like 15, 16 hours of covering how to use the various extensions in Flask. So if you want to check those out, I'll put a link in the description below. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.